Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the session on land laws. In today's session, I will talk about here the land disputes and legal remedies. In my previous lecture, I had discussed about the importance of land rights for the tribal and indigenous communities in preserving their cultural heritage. Access to ancestral land, it ensures these communities to maintain their way of life. It enables them to maintain their way of life in a very good manner and to pass on this traditional knowledge to the future generation. I had also mentioned the protection which is given under law for these tribal communities. Article 244 is there for the administration of the scheduled tribes and the tribal areas in the country. The issues which were faced by the tribals and the legal framework done for the resolution of these issues or for resolving these disputes. So in today's session here, I'm going to give an overview of dispute resolution forums, mediation, negotiation, arbitration, and litigation in land disputes. So first of all, I will start with what is basically land dispute. Whenever there is any dispute with respect to the use of land, with respect to the alienation of the land, or if there is any encroachment on the person's land, then sometimes the dispute goes before the court. It is basically a disagreement between two parties over the legal right of a particular piece of land. The legal rights include the title, possession, and control of land parcels under consideration. These disputes can arise due to a variety of reasons, such as dispute over ownership, title, boundaries, possession, construction, and maintenance, among others. Because encroachment on the land of other person, it may create a right for other person, such as an easement is there, encumbrance on the right of the other person. So there certain dispute will arise between the parties. There is a disagreement between two parties regarding the construction, regarding the ownership, if the possession is given to the tenant, if the certain disputes then arises between the parties. And this the legal rights which here include the title, the possession, the ownership, the interest, the rights, these are foremost reasons for the dispute between the parties. First one is title disputes. These occur when there is a disagreement over who owns a piece of land, who owns a property, or whether a title to the property is valid or not. Due to the lack of proper digitized land records in our country, there are high chances that fraudulent activities may rise in the sector related to the title of the real estate property. So this is one of the major issue for the land disputes regarding the title of the property. Who has the title? Whether the person who is in possession or whether the person who has a title. So whenever such type of dispute arises, again they go before the court. Second is dispute between builders, developers, and buyers. This is one of the reason basically whenever the person goes and deal with the builders, deal with the developers, between the seller and the buyer with respect to the property which were already charged or which were already disputed, so then also the dispute arises. Third one is dispute regarding the inherited or willed property. Again, this is challengeable because the will operates only after the death of the person, and whenever the the person mentioned in their will that they make this property in favor of the not to the family members but to the outsider, then again it will be challengeable by the family members. Easement dispute is there. These arise when there is a disagreement over the right to use a portion of someone else's property for a specific purpose, such as accessing a driveway or utility line, because easement is always exercised on the land of other person. So if a person exercise this right of way, right of water, right of passage for over many years, or for 6 months, for 1 year, so then it becomes their right to go from there, the right of way, and later on the person challenge this right. So again the dispute arises here between the parties. Disputes regarding non-provision of occupancy certificate. Buyers are not allowed to move into their new home because until and unless the builder doesn't get an occupancy certificate from the authorities. A delay in issuing an occupancy certificate happens because sometimes builders defy certain norms. Whenever the builders do not follow, or they does not follow the things which were there by issuing the directions by the MCDs, and uh, uh, they defy certain norms which were there, then but obvious this occupancy certificate was not issued to them, and for this reason also the persons were not able to occupy the possession, and dispute arises. Boundary disputes, these arise when there is a disagreement over the exact location of property lines between two adjacent landowners. Again, it is one of the major dispute, because sometimes when the property is attached, two lands are attached, and there is some boundary line, and there is no digital record there is no such record in written, then again the dispute arises regarding the disagreement between the parties regarding the exact location of the property. Then landlord tenant dispute is there. These occur when a tenant and landlord have a disagreement over lease terms, rent payments, or maintenance responsibilities. Because tenant has in possession of the house, and if he did not follow the directions, the landlords, if he suppose it's a subtenant, without the permission of the landowners, he had allow the other person to live with them in their room, and they did not follow the rules which were the directions the given by the landowners, there is a disagreement, and again there is a dispute arises between the landlord and the tenant. Incomplete information is again one of the cause of land disputes. The lack of complete information or non-disclosure of facts by the owner or the possessor of the property is one of the basic and major causes of conflict in the real estate sector. In most cases, purchasers claim that essential information was not provided to them at the time of purchase. This also includes the dues of the property which are pending concerning tax and bills that were not cleared previously. So due to this factor, due to this non-closure of facts, again the dispute arises between the parties, because one person concealed the important information from the other one, that the property is disputed property, that the property is already charged, or some other person has or the person was actually some other person is in possession of that property. So these non-disclosure of the facts and this concealment of the important information, complete information from the by given to the person, so then again the dispute arises. Next is land acquisition, one of the cause of land dispute again. In recent times, we see a lot of issues and conflicts between the parties related to the acquisition of land in cities like Greater Noida, where the farmers claim higher compensation for their lands. And because of this, buyers had to wait as the litigation continues for a long period of time, and it affects the real estate sector adversely. So again, this is one of the major cause of land disputes, because whenever these type of things were there regarding claiming compensation regarding for their lands, and because of this the person had to face certain challenges and problems in their business, in their real estate sector, it was adversely affected by that, then again the dispute arises. Environmental concern is there. There have been many cases of encroachment of environmental norms because of the increase in urbanization. For example, the land is vacant beside a national park, and for the welfare of the environment, many projects near that sanctuary are erratic, and this ultimately leads to disputes between the constructors and the buyers who had invested their money in these projects. Not only this, there are many other issues like construction waste, sewage disposal, noise pollution, etc., which also creates conflict amongst them, because this is again one of the major cause of the land disputes by encroachment of the environmental norms because of the increase in urbanization. The relevant laws which are here for dealing with the land laws is the Indian Contract Act 1872, the Transfer of Property Act 1882, Indian Easement Act 1882, the Land Acquisition Act 2013, Registration Act 1908, Indian Stamp Act 1899, Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016. So these laws here deals with this land law, the land rights, and talking about here regarding the Indian Contract Act 1872, which basically deals with the general principles of contract. It sets out the essential elements of a valid contract, which include there must be an agreement between the two parties. One party made an offer, the other party had accepted that offer. Consideration must be there. Each party must give something of value in exchange for the other's party promise. Intent to create legal relation between them. The parties must intend for their agreement to be legally binding. Capacity to contract. Both parties must be legally competent to enter into a contract. The object of the contract and the consideration must be lawful. So these are the essential elements of a valid contract between the parties, because when one party made an offer regarding the purchase of the land and the other party agreed to that, so then the person must be competent to sell that land, and the consideration must be moved from the buyer to the seller. There must be a valid there must be a lawful object. It is not occupied for illegal purpose or for fraudulent purpose, and both the parties must be particularly the seller must be competent to perform that contract. Even both the parties must be competent. The parties must intend for their agreement to be legally binding. So these are the essentials for creating a valid contract. There must be free consent, because consent may be obtained by coercion, by undue influence, by misrepresentation. Sometimes maybe the old person is not agreed to sell his land, but the person by exercising undue influence, who is in a position to dominate the will of that old person, his son, his grandson. So then in that condition, again this help, because if the person goes before the court and said that his consent has been obtained by undue influence, then the problem will be sought out. So the parties must consent it freely. It does not be obtained by undue influence, misrepresentation, by coercion, by making fraud over him. Next is damages. The insured party must be awarded damages to compensate them for their losses. Sometimes the party does not go for the specific performance of contract. They go before the court for claiming damages as a compensation. Like if the person given earnest money to the seller or the builders, so in that case the person goes before the court if something is there or some illegal, or the person make a fraud with the buyer. So in that condition he go before the court and ask for this damage. Next is specific performance. The court may order the breaching party to perform their obligations under the contract. Sometimes the person is not satisfied to claim damages if there is a breach of contract on the part of the other side. In that condition, he may file a case before the court for to pressurize the other person to specifically perform that contract which is there between them. So in that condition, he under Section 10 of Specific Relief Act, he filed a case for the specific performance. Resuscitation is there. The insured party may cancel the contract and recover any money or property that have given to the breaching party. Resuscitation is again one of the main essential element here, because the injured party may cancel the contract, rescind the contract which is there, which still subsist between them, and the property which have given to the breaching party. It again is in the hand of that person to exercise this option, because he can at any time rescind the contract. Then comes the Transfer of Property Act 1882. This law also deals with the land use or land rights, and a transfer here refers to a conversion of a thing from one person to another person. So it is essential that there must be two living persons. Property may be defined as anything physical or a virtual entity owned by an individual or a group of people. Property can be transferred from one person to another person by transferring rights or interest or ownership or possession. Because property here, it may be tangible, it may be intangible, it can be touched, it can be in the abstract form, it may be movable, it may be immovable. If it is immovable, it includes land, benefits arising out of land, things attached to the earth. Movable, like standing timber, growing crops or grass. So property is basically wider than the term land, because it includes anything attached to the land, and the buildings and the walls, structures, all thing is there. So a property can be transferred from one person to another person by transferring rights or interest or ownership or possession. Talking about here, it means regarding this right, by creating this interest, right, possession. So there must be a conveyance in favor of the other person. So the transfer of property can be made in the two following ways: by act of parties or by law. There are two modes of transfer of property: by operation of law or by the act of parties. In the act of parties, the parties voluntarily agree for that thing, that they want to sell their land. The other party accept that thing, and there is an agreement between the parties. Operation by law, or you can say that by court's order, it basically exclude by the Transfer of Property Act, because it only talks about the transfer between two living persons. So it excluded the transfer by operation of law or by court's order, because in that there is no voluntary act of the person. This transfer of property is defined under Section 5 of the Transfer of Property Act. It refers to an act done by a living person conveying property to one or more person, or by himself, or by one or more living persons in the present or the future. Living people include a company, an association, a body of individuals, whether incorporated or not. So according to this Section 5, living person may be a human person, he may be a juristic person. But the most important thing is, he must be in existence at the date of the transfer. He must be living, and the other person must accept that thing. And if I will give you here an example regarding this, the Section 5, like A is the grandson of G, and A owns 3 estates, of which he wanted to transfer one estate to his grandpa D, but he died 2 years ago. The transfer won't be held valid, because the transfer of property should happen between two living persons. It means when the person has already died before 2 years ago, and the person want to transfer his estate, there is no one to accept that, there is no one in whose favor the estate can be transferred, because the person has already died. And here the Transfer of Property Act, it talks about two living person must be there, transfer inter vivos, by the act of parties. So both the parties must be alive on the date of the transfer. The important concepts which are here highlighted in the Transfer of Property Act are immovable property, because it plays an important role, because this Transfer of Property Act, it mainly deals with the immovable property. And according to the General Clauses Act 1897, immovable property includes land, benefits to arise out of land, things attached to earth. And the definition which is given in the Transfer of Property Act of this immovable property, it includes things attached to the earth, things embedded in the earth, and things rooted in the earth. So then it makes a complete sense when we will combine the definition given in the General Clauses Act and in the Transfer of Property Act, that immovable property, it includes land, it includes benefits arising out of land, things attached to the earth, things embedded in the earth, things rooted in the earth, except growing standing timber, growing crops or grass, because they are movable property. So what is not immovable is movable. Next important concept here is instrument. This is very essential here because instrument refers to a non-testamentary instrument. Instrument means a legal document. Whenever a sale deed, a lease deed, a gift deed is executed, that deed here is a written document, is an instrument, because the transfer of property may be made by written mode or by orally, that is by giving the possession of the property. So whenever the property is transferred by the person in a written way, so in that case the instrument here is important for that purpose. That's why the definition is given non-testamentary instrument. Why it is mentioned here non-testamentary instrument? Because it excludes testamentary instrument, because testamentary means will, inheritance, which will operates only after the death of the person, and this act here talk about the transfer inter vivos, transfer between two living person. That's why the word used here, it is defined under the act as non-testamentary instrument. Instrument means any document through which any right, liability is created, transferred, extended or extinguished. Next important thing is in the Transfer of Property Act concept is attestation. Because in a transfer of property, there are three essentials. First one, it has to be executed. Next one, it has to be attested. Third one, it has to be registered. So after the execution of the document by the executant, it must be attested by two witnesses, at least two witnesses, and they must be competent to sign that document. So it refers to a formal document signed by a witness. The transfers of the property are known as the executant. The Amendment Act was introduced in 1926, which mentioned that there must be two or more witnesses who must sign the document in presence of the executant, not necessarily at the same time, but they should not be the party to the transfer. So basically the purpose of this attestation here is to verify the genuineness of the document, whether that is genuine or not. Because when two witnesses sign the document, it testify the thing that the executant has signed the document in their presence and the document is valid. It is not obtained through undue influence, through fraud. So this is important concept in the Transfer of Property Act. Next is registration. According to the Transfer of Property Act 1882, registered refers to any property registered where the act is operative. So one must comply with the various procedures of registration, because it is given in the mortgage deed that if the property is above rupees 100, if the value of the property is above rupees 100, then it has to be registered under the Indian Registration Act. Then only it has some evidentiary value in the eyes of law. Notice again is very important concept in the Transfer of Property Act. It refers to the knowledge of the fact. This doctrine of notice, it affects one's legal rights and liabilities. The person has a knowledge of facts about various circumstances, but according to the Transfer of Property Act, it prescribes two kinds of notices: actual or implied notice. Second is constructive notice. Actual notice means definite one. Actual knowledge, when the person actually knows that thing, it must be express one. It must not be hearsay or rumor. Talking about here constructive notice, it is imputed notice. It is legal presumption. It is based on this one because under certain circumstances the court presume that the person must know that fact, and the circumstances in which this legal presumption is inferred is when there is willful abstention from making an inquiry or search on the part of the person, when there is gross negligence on his part, when the document is already registered, actual possession is there, and notice to agent is a notice to principal. So in these circumstances, the court presume that the person has a notice In fact, he didn't. He did not have any actual notice, but in these circumstances, the court presumed that he deliberately avoiding to take notice of that fact. So, notice plays here an important role. The rule against perpetuity again is very important concept in transfer of property. It is necessary that the property must be transferred during the lifetime of the individual, because this transfer of property act, it basically deals with the transfer transfer between two living person. But what happens when one want to transfer a property in favor of an unborn person? Because unborn person is not in existence, he is not a living person. But there is a provision here in the transfer of property. We have section 13, which is there for the benefit of the unborn person. Anyone can transfer the property in favor of an unborn person by creating life interest in favor of a living person till the time when the unborn person comes into existence. So that person, he act as a trustee, he has to preserve the property, he has all the right, but he cannot dispose of the property, because ultimately the absolute interest is given to the unborn person. Next important provision is conditional transfer of property. Property may be transferred unconditionally or conditionally. The condition may be precedent condition, it may be subsequent condition. But if the condition is subsequent, then the transferee is not bound by such condition, because it is against the very concept of the right of ownership, because the person has a right to deal with his property as he like. So, according to section 10 and 11 of this TPA, the person property cannot transferred conditionally, and if it is particularly condition subsequent, because both the section deals with condition subsequent. Then comes next law. The next act is Registration Act, which deals with this land law, the land rights. And the objective of the Registration Act here, it ensures proper preservation and record of such document. It is very important document, because once if it be a sale deed, if it be a lease deed, if it be a gift deed, once it is registered, then it ensures the preservation and record of such document. It has some evidentiary value. So, if in future any dispute arises with respect to the possession of the land, with respect to the title of the property, and the property is registered, then the person may challenge that thing. Documents which are required to be registered act as a valid evidence in a court of law. Registered documents assist in the prevention of fraud. Registration Act gives people information regarding legal rights and obligations arising or affecting a particular property. Documents which are compulsorily registrable are given in section 17, because some of the documents are not compulsorily registrable, because the registration in those cases may be optional, like will is there. In will, there is no, it is not mandatory to register that will. So, there are certain documents which are compulsorily registrable, like sale, like lease, like gift, they are compulsorily registrable. So, section 17 lays down all the documents which are compulsorily required to be registered, and those documents are instruments of the gift of immovable property, lease of immovable property from year to year or any time frame exceeding 1 year, non-testamentary instrument which acknowledge the payment of any consideration, testamentary instruments which are transferring or assigning any decree or order of the court. So, these are the documents which are compulsorily required to be registered. Documents of which registration is optional is all the documents that are not included in section 17. It means they have the option of the optional registration. So, section 18 is the relevant provision for such documents where the registration is optional. Now, the effect of non-registration, what will be the consequence of it if the document is not registered? For this, we have section 49, which states the effects of non-registration of documents which are required to be registered. The effects are: non-registration of a deed of adoption shall not grant any power to adopt. A document required to be registered which is not registered, It cannot be taken as evidence for the creation of any right, duty, or liability of immovable property. That document simply becomes useless. The person cannot claim that before the court. Where a document is not registered, then in such condition it cannot be allowed to affect an immovable property which the document comprises, and it cannot be received as evidence of any form of transaction that is affecting such property. Then we have the Indian Stamp Act 1899, which deals with this land law, land rights. Indian Stamp Act was introduced by the British government with the sole purpose of acting as a revenue generating mechanism for the government. This act imposes liability to pay stamp duty on certain and specific documents. This Indian Stamp Act acts as a fiscal legislation, and the objectives of the Stamp Act is to generate revenue for the Indian government. A document which is stamped acts as a valid evidence in a court of law. The Stamp Act also makes payment of stamp duty on some documents compulsory, which in return makes those documents legally valid and authentic. The important terms which are there in this Indian Stamp Act, which is important here in the context of the land laws and land rights. Conveyance is there. Section 2, subsection 10 deals with this definition. It basically includes an instrument by which property is transferred. It applies to both movable and immovable property. Sale deed, transfer of lease, release, settlement are all chargeable as conveyance. Duly stamped is defined in section 2, subsection 11. It means that the instrument bears the adhesive or impressed stamp, not below the amount essential by law, and further no violation to the manner prescribed by law. The amount of stamp to be used is governed by provisions and scheduled to the Stamp Act. The manner of stamping is governed by section 10 to 19 of the Act and also by the rules framed by the government. Under this head are included particulars as to the description and the number of stamps to be used. Thus, an instrument which is to be written on a paper with an impressed stamp is not duly stamped if it bears only an adhesive stamp of the value and vice versa. Then we have Indian Easement Act 1882, which deals with this land law. It is a law that governs the rights and obligations of landowners and easement holders. An easement is a right to use someone else's land for a specific purpose such as access, drainage, or support. The Act defines easements and sets out the rules for how they can be created, transferred, and terminated. The Act applies to all easements in India, except for those that are created by statute or by implication of law. Easements can be created by express grant, by implication, or by prescription. An express grant is a written agreement between the landowner and the easement holder. An easement by implication arises when the landowner creates a situation that makes it necessary for someone else to use their land in order to enjoy their own land. An easement by prescription arises when someone uses someone else's land for a certain period of time, usually 20 years, without the landowner's permission. So once an easement is created, it is binding on both the landowner and the holder, easement holder. The landholder must allow the easement holder to use their land for the purpose specified in the easement. The easement holder must use the land in a reasonable manner and must not interfere with the landowner's use of their land. The Act also set out the rules for how easements can be transferred. An easement can be transferred with the land, or it can be transferred separately. If an easement is transferred separately, the new owner of the easement will have the same rights and obligations as the original easement holder. Next act in the line is Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013. This act provides compensation to the landowners whose land has been acquired by the government for public purpose by giving them a good compensation in respect to their land. So, the Land Acquisition Act of 2013 is a landmark legislation that provides fair and equitable compensation to landowners whose land is acquired by the government for public purposes. The Act also sets out a transparent and efficient process for land acquisition and provides for safeguards to protect the interest of landowners. The Act defines public purpose broadly to include a wide range of activities such as the construction of roads, bridges, dams, airports, and other infrastructure projects. The Act also provides for the acquisition of land for private companies, but only if the land is required for a project, but this is in the public interest. Now, the process of land acquisition, how it can be processed. So, the Act here sets out a two-step process for land acquisition, for acquiring the land from the people by the government. In the first step, the government must notify the landowner of its intention to acquire the land by notifying it. The landowner is then given an opportunity to object to the acquisition. If the landowner doesn't object, or if the objection is overruled, the government may proceed to the second step of the process. In the second step, the government must make an offer of compensation to the landowner. The compensation, it must be based on the market value of the land and must include an amount for the landowner's disturbance and relocation cost. The landowner has the right to accept or reject the offer of compensation. If the landowner rejects the offer, the government may acquire the land through the courts. This is the second step. And the safeguards which are provided in the Act which to protect the interest of landowners are, it includes a right to appeal to the courts if the landowner is dissatisfied with the compensation offered by the government, a right to receive compensation for the landowner's disturbance and relocation costs, a right to be consulted about the proposed acquisition, a right to be given a fair price for the land. The Land Acquisition Act of 2013 is a significant improvement over the previous law, which has widely criticized for being unfair and arbitrary. The new Act, it provides for a more transparent and equitable process for land acquisition, and it protects the interests of landowners. The real estate next law is which deals with the land law and land rights is the Real Estate Regulation Development Act 2016. Provisions of this Real Estate Regulation Development Act apply to the residential apartments, buildings and plots, whether residential or commercial. The real estate project defined in the Act includes the development of buildings consisting of apartments, converting existing buildings into apartments, and developing land into plots for the sale of all or some of the said apartments to carry out the purpose of the Act. The main aspects covered by this Act, it includes all project-related information, contract documents for buying and selling properties, carpet area stipulation, limitation of an advance fee to 10% of the apartment, a deposit of 70% of the money collected from the buyers in the escrow account, timely completion of the project and panel provisions. Salient features of this Act are, it regulates and promotes the real estate sector by establishing the Real Estate Regulatory Authority. It protects the interest of the consumers and buyers and ensures the prevention of malpractices against them. It establishes adequate and speedy dispute redressal system and also appellate tribunals to hear and adjudge appeals from the orders, directions or decisions of the Real Estate Regulatory Authority. It ensures that 2/3 of the allottees give their written consent in addition to the regulatory of this Act written approval when a promoter has to transfer or assign a majority of the rights and responsibilities in a real estate project to a third party. It imposes a stringent penalty on the promoters and real estate agents and also prescribes imprisonment. This Act is one such which covers all the projects mentioned above, irrespective of whether it is commercial or residential. It is mandatory to register all projects of more than 500 square meters. Now I will give you an overview of this Act. In Section 20, we have state level regulatory authorities. In Section 43, Real Estate Appellate Tribunal is there. In Section 3, it provides for mandatory registration, deposits. Section 61 deals with the penal interest on default. Section 13 deals with the ceiling on advance payments. Section 66, it provides punishment. Now, I am coming to this one, modes of settlement of land disputes in India. Because in this session, I am talking about the land disputes and legal remedies. So, modes of settlement of land disputes, it can be by negotiation, by mediation, by filing a civil suit. By negotiation and mediation, this involves the parties who are involved in the suit negotiating and coming to a mutually agreeable solution. Mediation involves a neutral third party facilitating the negotiation process. So basically, these are the modes of alternative dispute resolution. These are the modes, these are the mechanisms where the person settle their disputes in a win-win situation without going through the strict procedure of the court of law. Second one is filing a civil suit. If negotiation and mediation fail, the parties may file a civil suit in the appropriate court to resolve the dispute. The court will hear both sides and make a decision based on the evidence presented. So if the negotiation and mediation doesn't work, then in that case the party goes before the court, they file a civil suit, and the court pass an order on the basis of the evidence produced before the court. Alternative dispute resolution methods like arbitration or conciliation may also be used to resolve property disputes. These methods are faster and less expensive than going to court. But for arbitration and conciliation, the consent of the parties is must. There must be an arbitration agreement between the parties that if any dispute or difference arises in future with respect to the land, then they will go before the arbitrator, who will be the arbitrator also decided by the party who will be the arbitrator, the procedure. So this method is much quicker than the litigation process. Seeking relief under specific property laws. Specific property laws like the Transfer of Property Act, the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, the Land Acquisition Act may provide relief in certain types of property disputes. The courts or the forums which are involved here for resolving these disputes are: in India, property disputes can be dealt with by various courts and tribunals depending on the nature and value of the dispute. The courts that commonly deal with property dispute include Civil Court, District Courts, High Courts, and the Supreme Court of India. Additionally, specialized tribunals such as the Real Estate Regulatory Authority and the National Company Law Tribunal may also handle property disputes in specific circumstances. The specific court or tribunal that will handle a property dispute will depend on the facts and circumstances of the case. Next is mediation, the future of property dispute resolution, which plays an important role in resolving the land disputes. Initiation with the selection of a qualified mediator, either mutually agreed upon by the parties or appointed by a court. Because mediation is a process in which the mediator plays an important role. He assists the parties in resolving their dispute, and it is basically the decision of the people, not the mediator. He only suggests them, he only assists them, he just want to settle down the dispute between them by giving them reasoning, by giving them the suggestions. So initiation with the selection of a qualified mediator is essential, because sometimes the mediation is of two kinds: private mediation and court annex mediation. In private mediation, the parties appoint the mediator. In court annex mediation, the court refer the case to the mediator under section 89 of Code of Civil Procedure. So, the key stages of mediation, which is very important here, are the mediation process involves several stages. Opening remarks. The mediator outlines the process and establishes an environment of respect and collaboration. Statement of the problem. Each party presents their perspective without interruption. Information gathering. The mediator, he asks questions to clarify issues and uncover underlying interests. Identifying interests and options. Parties explore various solutions and compromises. Reaching an agreement. Once a solution is agreed upon, it's formalized in writing. So these are the stages which are used in mediation. Basically, it is informal in nature. It is not formal like litigation. There are 4 stages. Like first one is opening stage, in which the mediator, he just set down the ground rules of mediation. He tell the parties about the quality of the mediation, that it is confidential in nature, it is flexible, and it is basically through this one you can resolve your dispute without going to the court, because court procedure is very long, it is not quicker, it is not cheaper. So in opening remarks, the mediator, he set out the ground rules of mediation. Then comes joint session, in which the mediator, he basically gather facts from the parties. What is basically the dispute between the parties? What is the what they're trying to resolve what is the issue, underlying interest between the parties. Then in separate session, he deals with the parties in different timing with them in different sitting, and it is confidential. It basically this stage is there to make them comfortable, because sometimes the party may not say able to say in front of the other party whatever he want to say. So in that case, this stage is it play an important role in the mediation. Last one is closing, where the mediator, if there is an agreement, he is write down that and the parties sign that, and then it will go before the court for passing a decree. Now the benefits of choosing mediation for property disputes. What are the benefits for choosing mediation? As it is cost effective and time saving, because sometimes the disputes, it may solve within 2 days, within a week, within 15 days. So it is time saving too, and it is cost effective, because in court procedure the person has to pay to the lawyer, to the court fee they have to pay, and certain things they have to do. Next is preserving relationships and confidentiality. This is one of the quality of this mediation, because one of the essential, because by preserving relationship, because sometimes what happen, the neighbors, there is a dispute arises between the neighbors with respect to the encroachment on their land or on the house. So in that case, they also want to maintain relationship forever. So they appoint a mediator, and then the mediator help them to come out from that problem and provide a solution to them. Next is control and flexibility, because flexibility is there, because the mediator, he at any time, at any place, he call them and he suggests them to solve their case mutually and in a win-win situation. So all the control is in the hands of the party. That's why it is a party-centered process. It is a voluntary process of the party in mediation. The party plays an important role in the mediation. And this mediation, it basically deals with these land disputes, commercial disputes, child custody. So it is very helpful for all kinds of disputes along with this, particularly in this land disputes. Now the challenges which will be faced in property mediation are the possibility of power imbalance. This is one of the challenge which the parties have to face. Next is challenge of choosing an experienced mediator, because sometimes the mediator may not have that sufficient knowledge which he must have. So, due to the lack of knowledge, the mediator can't suggest the right thing to the party. Willingness to compromise. If the party doesn't want to compromise, if they want to give punishment, if they want to set out the principle, then they go before the court. They do not go for this mediation. So this is again one of the challenge in property mediation, because the parties they have a thing in their mind that the court will give the right decision. So in that case, it will be a great challenge. So in the last, I would like to conclude that the benefit of mediation in property disputes is vast. But in my view, the greatest benefit is reaching a decision outside of the confines of the court order. Often these disputes involve neighbors who are going to live beside each other and see each other most days for most of their lives. Being able to find a solution to suit both parties, which is thought up and agreed between themselves, rather than enforced by a judge, provides for a much happier home living environment. The mediator, he takes a totally impartial, even non-judgmental, non-opinionated role. That is not the role either party is able to muster in a property dispute, nor the role of a judge. As such, what the mediator brings to the table in a dispute is an alternative for the parties, a way to reach a solution, a way to end the matter there and then, a way to stop the conflict, a way to stop spending money, a way for the parties to come together to themselves find a solution they are both content with. So, in these alternative mechanisms, these modes of settlement, the arbitration, conciliation, mediation plays an important role along with the judicial system, along with the litigation, because sometimes the people do not want to go before the court. They want to set out their dispute by talking to each other in a compromised manner. For that, they have to negotiate. If the person want to purchase the property, then he has to negotiate with the seller, he has to negotiate with the builder. If the tenant want to purchase a house or to for on rent from the landlord, then also he has to negotiate with him with respect to the price, with respect to the location, with respect to the things, the amenities which he wants. So in that, it helps a lot, the negotiation. In arbitration and conciliation, as I had already said, that the consent is required, because in section 89, the court even cannot refer the case to the arbitration and conciliation without the permission of the parties. So if they have an agreement, only then the court refer the parties to the arbitration and conciliation. Then we have the mediation. So mediation here plays an important role, because this is the only mode of ADR which gives the parties a satisfactory solution of their problem, of the dispute with respect to this land rights, with respect to the land laws. If any dispute arises regarding the title, regarding the ownership of the land, regarding the purchase of the land, if there is any dispute with respect to the non-disclosure of important information, then this mediation is very important here, which plays an important role in resolving the land dispute and provide the legal remedies along with the litigation to the parties. So in today's session and after today's session, you are able to understand what laws are there for the regulation and for the governance of these land laws and land rights. As I had talked about, the Transfer of Property Act, which is a very important act which deals with the transfer of immovable property. The Indian Contract Act, where the parties made an agreement with respect to the anything, land or the contract with regarding to buying or selling. We have Indian Stamp Act. We have this Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013. We have this Real Estate Act. So these are the laws which basically deals with the land laws and the land rights, and certain important provisions are there. We have Indian Registration Act, which documents must be compulsorily registrable, which documents are optional. So I had already discussed these things, and you will be now able to understand what basically the land law is, because the land law which is given, because it is not given in a single piece of legislation. Every state have a different uh, laws, have a different rules regarding the governance of land, including ownership, land use, access, boundaries. So it is the form of law that deals with the right to use, alienate and exclude others from the land. We have Indian Easement Act, because encumbrance on the land of another may have the right of the other one, such as an easement, because easement is always exercised on the land of another person. So these are the laws which basically deals with the land laws and the land rights and the legal remedies. As I had already mentioned in my presentation, that this legal remedies, we have the alternative dispute resolution. So I had given an overview of the arbitration resolution process, that is negotiation, mediation, arbitration and conciliation. We have certain tribunals, we have certain remedies under these acts too, like we have LARR Act 2013, Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, in which certain provisions are there. We have real estate sector, in which the provisions regarding the appeal is there. So these laws here deals with the remedies. So land disputes, whenever there is a disagreement between the parties with respect to the title, with respect to the possession, how to control that from the fear of being dispossessed from the land. So in that case, the dispute arises, and once the dispute arises, the person has to find out the way, has to find out the solution of their problem, where they will get remedy. So for that purpose, we have the courts, like the district courts has the power, civil court, high court is there, in appeals Supreme Court is there. So litigation process is equally important for resolving these land disputes, these particularly known as civil suits, which in comes under the section 16 to 18 of the Code of Civil Procedure Act 1908, because in that the any dispute with respect to immovable property, that must be filed under section 16. If it be of partition, if it be of the encroachment, if it be on regarding the sale of immovable property. So we have this provision in Code of Civil Procedure. So that's why these land disputes, it comes under the civil suits, and we have these legal remedies. And in spite of this litigation, we have these other remedies, other alternatives. We can say it is a bypass, we can say that it is an alternative, because the person, without going through the strict procedure of the court of law, they may sort out their situation. They both are in a situation, win-win situation, where both have a benefit without going through the strict court procedure. In that, it is their solution, it is their participation, fully participation, where the person only mediate, only suggest how to resolve their dispute. He only give his advice. He does not uh, allow the party to interfere in between the mediation proceedings. He settle those things within the thing on the table. He took out both the parties on the table and then give the decision, and then the settlement agreement is there, which will be drafted by the mediator. So this mediator must be a neutral person. That's why here the benefit of mediation in property dispute is vast, because this is a way to stop spending money. This is a way to stop the conflict between the parties. It is a way for the parties to come together at the same time on the same table to find a solution for themselves in a mutual agreeable solution. And this can be effectively done by these process the mediation, conciliation and arbitration. Thank you.